It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Patrick Shepard. Thank you, sir. You may begin.
Thank you, Holly. Good afternoon and welcome to the Advanced Practitioner Series. My name is Patrick Shepard. Very pleased to be joined today by Brandon Steele from OGE's Program Council Division. And today he's going to be discussing an overview of your responses to the annual Agency Ethics Program Questionnaire. And I think this is kind of an interesting presentation because really we're sharing with you your hard work. We know it takes a lot of work to create this data, and we want to present it to you in a way that is useful and can help to benefit your program. So we're very grateful to Brandon for joining us to walk us through that data, share some highlights, and maybe some tips to how we can use this data to strengthen the executive branch ethics program. So welcome, Brandon.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Shall I pull up your slides and we can just get into it?
Sure, let's start.
Excellent. Just give me a second. All right, and you are all set, sir.
Perfect. So welcome everyone to the presentation. Going to start out with a very brief overview of the questionnaire itself, what it is, why we do it. Last year we sent 87 questions to agencies to assess certain aspects of the executive branch's ethics program. And as in years past, we had a 100% response rate. And to sort of echo what Patrick said, I would like to thank everyone in the ethics community for taking the time out of their very busy schedules to provide us with quality data. We use this data in a variety of ways internally. For example, the program review branch uses these questionnaires in preparation for a program review. But we also use this data to respond to requests, for example, from Congress or the Government Accountability Office. And of course, agencies use this data for benchmarking purposes and to also advocate for additional resources for the program. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to provide us with quality data. So without further ado, let's dive into the results of the 2015 annual questionnaire. In this next section, we're going to cover a few broad aspects of the ethics program. So who are the ethics officials? In 2015, over 90% of DAOs were career employees. That's up slightly from 2014, where 85% were career employees. There was a pronounced shift from 2014 in the time allocation category, though. In 2014, 74% of DAOs spent less than 25% of their time on ethics-related duties. In 2015, we saw quite a sizable increase. It went up, or excuse me, that went down to 56%, but the increase comes in the category of DAOs allocating over 75% of their time to the ethics program. So there's definitely a shift there. Also interesting is that the overwhelming majority of DAOs have ethics duties as a distinct element in their performance standards. So even those ethics officials that may not be spending 100% of their time managing the ethics program are still held accountable for the results. Of course, DAOs don't run the ethics program alone, and this slide looks at the breakdown of support staff. This is pretty much consistent with last year. As was reported last year, the majority of ethics officials are outside of the DC area. In addition to these ethics officials, 23% of agencies reported also using contractors. Now, these were primarily focused on e-filing, financial disclosure forms, basically. And it's going to be interesting to see in this next year's survey and in the years to come how that number shifts as more agencies adopt the integrity e-filing system, which is, of course, OGE's e-filing system.
I think this is really interesting, Brandon, especially this piece of data from a training perspective, learning that there are almost twice as many ethics officials outside of the DC metro area. I think when we came across this data, first, it really opened our eyes to the need to find other training resources, other ways of reaching ethics officials in the field, and this contributed to our move to distance learning type events. So I think that's an interesting example of how OGE uses this data to better serve the community.
Yeah, and it makes sense that the majority of ethics officials would be stationed outside of DC because, of course, the majority of federal employees, government-wide, are stationed outside of DC. And you brought up the distance learning, and that's actually going to be interesting because we'll talk about that later, because distance learning modalities are catching up to standard classroom modalities, and this is probably a good reason why.
That's fascinating.
Let's talk resource allocation. To begin with, while over 70% overall of the agencies reported not needing additional resources, it's interesting that 55% of large agencies reported wanting more resources in 2015. 79% needed additional human capital. So while most large agencies, or a majority of large agencies, needed additional resources, it's not necessarily true that they all needed human capital resources. They may have needed technology resources or just financial resources in general. But the two boxes below, the purple and the blue box, they take a look at the average number of government employees per ethics official, and it's broken down by agency size. And so the 2015 is the purple box and 2014 is the blue box. Now, there was a drop from 2014 to 2015, but unfortunately, that's not because there were more ethics officials or more resources. That's actually because there was a drop in the overall size of the federal workforce. Of course, this data can be used in a few different ways. So if you're at a larger agency or mid-sized agency and you're advocating for more resources, of course, you can use that data as a starting point. Another way to use the data, for example, would be if you're at a large agency and you're hiring a new ethics official. If they're coming from a small agency, they're probably not going to be used to handling as much volume as an ethics official at a large agency would be handling.
Yeah, I think these numbers are fascinating, as it's a couple orders of magnitude difference between the small agencies and the large agencies, and you could think of lots of reasons for that. Some that there are efficiencies in large agencies that aren't existent in small agencies. Small agencies just have lower numbers of employees generally, so if you're dividing by one or two, you get a relatively small number. But the spread is very interesting.
Sure,
it's a different game entirely.
And it's not necessarily true based upon this data that large agencies are necessarily overworked relative to small agencies, because of course we don't know within that how many requests they're getting at a time, and how difficult the questions are. But there's definitely a difference, right, as Patrick said, in magnitude between the small to mid-sized to large agencies. And that trend's been fairly consistent.
Yeah.
So where do these ethics officials spend their time? Well, most agencies, and this is whether large or small, reported spending a significant amount of time on advice and counsel. Actually, less than 20% reported spending a limited amount of time in this area, and those were mostly small agencies. Now, there's a drop-off between the first category, or the first place, and the second place. And in second place, it's really a three-way tie. And that's between the public and confidential financial disclosure systems, and then education and training. But these numbers are actually very similar to 2014. So it's been pretty consistent that ethics officials spend a good amount of time on advice and counsel, and then they get into spending time on education and training and their financial disclosure systems.
That's great. And I think that speaks a little bit to the success that ethics officials must be having in terms of making employees aware of the availability of ethics advice. Because it's not just what we decide to spend our time on. We need the cooperation of employees to seek advice and counseling, and to see that that's a significant part of the workload is encouraging.
Definitely. So where do agencies not spend their time? Well, the number one category was disciplinary process violations, and that was closely followed by special government employees. Over 50% of agencies reported spending no time on process violations, and no agency reported spending more than a moderate amount of time here. That's going to make sense later as we get to the enforcement slides. But overall, this could indicate that there has been a positive effect of all the time spent on prevention. In the prior slide, of course, we learned that agencies spend a lot of time on advice and counseling and education and training, which are both prevention tools. So it's not definitive, but as an agency that focuses on prevention, it's definitely encouraging. Now, we're not the only ones that do program reviews. A majority of agencies reported conducting self-assessments, and this is important. 3 of the top 5 areas that they assessed or that they reviewed really concerned some aspect of the advice and counseling apparatus, timeliness, accuracy, etc. And of course, that's also where the agencies spend their most time overall. So it makes sense that that's also an area that they're going to assess. Closely related to this, nearly every agency has written policies covering aspects of the financial disclosure. And that helps with the measure of consistency as well as timeliness of the responses.
I think, the self-assessments, this is really an encouraging trend. If you're interested in conducting self-assessments and you have yet to do one, we did offer a broadcast back in July, sharing with agencies how they can use OGE's ethics inspection form as a self-assessment tool to do sort of a desk audit. So if you're in that 42% that is not conducting self-assessments and you're interested in giving it a go, that might be a resource for you.
Prevention, it's a critical component of any ethics program, certainly why we exist. Let's look at the tools in this area. As we learned, agencies spend a lot of time on training. It's interesting that over 70% of agencies go beyond the basic training requirements and provide training even to employees that aren't required to receive it. And close to 90% of agencies develop their own training materials. Now, as I talked about earlier, the modes of delivery are pretty interesting because while similar to last year in terms of the order of the top modes of delivery, the gap between classroom instruction and self-paced, web-based instruction is closing rapidly. And this may indicate that agencies are shifting to this modality. As Patrick said, we're certainly finding it more efficient to provide that type of training because of the decentralization of the overall workforce within the ethics community. Now, as far as initial ethics training is concerned, most agencies include it as part of the new hire process. Now, in 2015, less than 75% of new hires received their initial ethics training within 90 days.
So that seems kind of low to me. Is that a drop off from years past?
Well, you're very astute there in pointing that out. So in years past, this number was in the 90s, and we actually would fully expect that number to be back in the 90s next year. This is a pretty unique circumstance, and it's actually the circumstance leading to this drop is why self-assessments are so important, and actually even why the questionnaire is important. There was actually one agency who had a branch that inadvertently stopped providing ethics training within that 90-day window, and that accounts for most of this drop here. So that agency was able to spot that fairly quickly. We talked to them about it. We had the desk officer speak with them about it, and they took corrective action, right? So they were able to address the problem, ensuring that all employees that needed to receive it within that 90-day window received it, but then also went back in and tracked down the employees that didn't receive it, and we're working on getting those employees up to date.
That's really interesting. So it's sort of, this isn't just a collection exercise. If we see big glitches or big changes, we hope the agencies notice that when they're preparing the data to share with us, but we're going to follow up and sort of make sure that any glitches like that get fixed so that the program can get back to functioning properly. So this is a good occasion. In some ways it is a self-assessment as you're conducting this or gathering this data to see how you're doing. How were you doing last year? Are there big changes? And if there are, it's good to figure out why.
Definitely. And we definitely compare it to last year's results, and it's a pretty thorough analysis. I mean, we can't, track down each number and everything like that, but I'm sure agencies got tired of hearing either from me or from their desk officer. So this is the financial disclosure slide. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this slide because I'm not sure that there was a lot of interesting data for DAOs to use. So we'll just take a brief look at this financial disclosure tool. I do think some interesting data points here are that around 20% of agencies use intermediate review, meaning the report received scrutiny before coming to an ethics official for review, and that was generally done by the line supervisor. And so that's sort of a bit of a double check. And I think it also helps the line supervisor understand, what's going on with employees that may be in sensitive positions. And again, most agencies have written procedures when it concerns financial disclosure. So what about the area where ethics officials spend most of their time? As in years past, the top 3 questions still happen to be consistently gifts, financial disclosure, and outside employment. Now, the overwhelming majority of agencies memorialize their advice and counseling. And I think that ties into what we talked about with the self-assessments, because it allows agencies to measure both the accuracy and somewhat the timeliness, right, of the counsel that they provided. But less than half of the agencies use templates for this advice and counseling. So most agencies give some sort of ad hoc advice and counseling when it comes to these questions, but then they memorialize it. And what about remedies? Well, as in prior years, recusal reigns supreme. And that's true for both the annual financial disclosure reports as well as the transactional reports. But waivers were granted in 2015, and most of those related to SGEs serving on advisory committees.
That's interesting to see. There are quite a few more B3 FACA waivers than the lesser used B1 waiver. And I guess that's sort of consistent with previous years and sort of what we would expect to see. But it's interesting to see it on the slide.
Definitely. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah.
So even with the focus on prevention, of course, we know that enforcement is required. Now, OGE itself only focuses on prevention, but we do ask questions about enforcement because it's an aspect of whether prevention is working, right? It gives us a data point to go off of. So let's dive right into the enforcement numbers. The total number of disciplinary actions related to violations of the standards of conduct actually declined 35% year over year. Subpart G, which relates, of course, to misuse of position, saw the lion's share of disciplinary action. Subpart A was in second place. I think in Subpart A, we're probably looking at violations of supplemental agency regulations. And then the rest of the allocation there was really split between all of the other subparts. But G is by far supreme. There were very few disciplinary actions related to violations of the criminal conflicts of interest provisions. And the overwhelming majority of those concern acts affecting a personal financial interest.
Wow, more than 9 out of 10 criminal violations were 208. That's fascinating. Yeah, I think you'd expect that to be the majority, but that's a very big majority.
Yeah, it's definitely. And I mean, it's 20, right? The other
right.
Just 2 violations elsewhere. So it is small numbers, 22. But like you said, it is sort of interesting that that's the area where it's most focused at.
Maybe all our focus on financial disclosure and preventing conflicts is well placed.
Yeah, there's a method to the madness.
Yeah.
But let's look at those numbers in a trend analysis. So on the left, we have the trends since 2005 in the criminal conflict of interest statutes, and on the right, same trend since 2005, focusing on the standards of conduct. So of course, as you can see over the years, that it's gone down. Now, again, being a preventive agency, I would definitely hope that that's related to the work on prevention and the advice and counseling and financial disclosure and so on and so forth. But of course, just from the information that we have in the survey, I can't say definitively that that's the case.
Lots of factors go into this.
So where can you find all this information? The individual surveys, as well as a summary of the survey, are accessible from our website. And if you go to www.og.gov, and it takes you to the homepage, and the bottom right-hand box, the one with the flag, Open Government, the last link there actually takes you to the individual surveys, and then you also get to see the sample questionnaire that went out.
I think that's that's a really good summary, and I think this is also very timely. I know a lot of programs are preparing for transition and they're preparing to brief new leadership. And this benchmarking data provides folks with a really good opportunity to show where their program fits in. You know, how are our resources compared to other similarly situated agencies? How are our compliance numbers compared to other similarly situated agencies? So, you know, in addition to thinking about this as a check on your own program, I think it's also an opportunity to provide context around, you know, the strengths and maybe challenges that your program creates.
Definitely.
Well, it looks like we have a couple of minutes left. So we would like to open it up for questions. Holly, if we can open up the phone for any questions, and for the folks on the Hangout, if you have questions, you can type them in the chat box in the lower right-hand corner of your screen.
Thank you. To ask a question, please unmute your phone, press star followed by the number 1, and record your name clearly when prompted so I may introduce your question. To withdraw your question, press star 2. Again, to ask a question, star 1. One moment, please, for incoming questions.
Great. Thank you, Holly. I think it's really interesting that we're able to provide this data on the website in a way that folks can just go and take a look, because I think in addition to us as members of the executive branch ethics community, this can be valuable information for citizens who are trying to figure out the composition of the executive branch ethics program, policymakers, think tanks. Is really a big resource that provides an interesting and sort of thorough overview of how we manage these issues in the executive branch.
It's definitely goes hand in hand with transparency in government. Like you said, citizens can go look at the data, journalists, etc. And it's actually something that is relatively new, right? We just started releasing in 2014 all of the survey results. So it's definitely interesting to take a look at those, compare agency to agency, how the programs are doing, the types of resources they said that they needed compared to other agencies of similar sizes, etc.
Yeah, I think by making it transparent and available, it can really has sort of a protective effect. You know, we're not ignoring difficulties. You know, if agencies are saying that they don't have the resources, you know, we're making that information available and known so that action can be taken, hopefully, to correct those problems.
Definitely.
Right. I'm not showing any questions on the Hangout. Do we have any questions on the phone, Holly?
No questions over the phone at this time, but as a reminder, it's star 1 to ask a question.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. We hope you found this helpful. We hope you take a minute to go and dig through some of the data, see if you find anything interesting to your program. If you have successes, if you're able to use this data to strengthen your program, to make changes, and you'd like to share those successes with us, we always like to share those success stories with the rest of the community. So reach out to your desk officer. You know, we want to hear how you're using this, how we can do better, if there are ways that we can make this information available to you that would be more helpful. Thank you again for joining us, and please join us next month. We'll be back here for our regularly scheduled broadcasts. And we hope to see you again soon.
This concludes today's